I used your wedding fund where it actually mattered. My mother said it like she was doing me a favor. So why was my sister sitting there in silence, avoiding my eyes? Why did the bank statement in my hand show transfers I never approved? And why was my grandmother's attorney now pulling out a sealed envelope with my name on it? I hadn't even processed the fact that my entire wedding fund was gone. But something in the room shifted when Mr. Pierce said quietly, "Your grandmother anticipated this." And suddenly, it wasn't just about money anymore. If you're listening from somewhere outside the US, I'm curious, where are you right now? What time is it there? Drop it in the comments, and if stories like this feel a little too real, you might want to stick around. 2 years before that envelope ever touched Mr. Pierce's desk, my grandmother stood in her kitchen holding a chipped ceramic mug, watching me like she was trying to measure something I couldn't see. "Nova," she said, not looking away, "do you trust your mother with money that's meant for you?" It wasn't the kind of question people ask casually. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, half smiling like she had to be joking. "That's specific." "I'm serious." There was something steady in her tone. No drama, no accusation, just certainty. I hesitated longer than I wanted to admit. "I trust her to do what she thinks is right," I said carefully. My grandmother nodded once like she'd expected that answer. "That's not the same thing." Her name was Isabel Alvarez. Everyone else called her stubborn. I called her precise. She didn't waste words, and she didn't make guesses without reason. That day, she walked me into her study, a small room with a narrow window and a filing cabinet that had been there longer than I had been alive. She opened the top drawer, flipped through a set of folders, and pulled out a sealed document. "This," she said, placing it on the desk between us, "is a trust I set up years ago. I didn't touch it right away." "For Camila?" I asked. She gave me a look. "No." That surprised me more than I expected. "It's for your wedding," she continued, "or whatever you choose to use it for when that time comes. But legally, it's designated for you." I stepped closer, reading my name printed across the top, Nova Isabel Gomez. "How much is in it?" I asked. "Enough that it matters," she said. "Not enough to fix everything if it's misused." That answer told me exactly how much thought she'd put into it. I looked back at her. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because," she said, "you're at the point in your life where other people will start making decisions that affect you, and they'll tell themselves it's for your own good." I exhaled slowly. "You mean Mom?" "I mean anyone who believes they're entitled to redirect what isn't theirs." She tapped the document lightly. "This trust has conditions. It cannot be reassigned or withdrawn without your authorization. Not implied authorization. Not verbal. Documented." I frowned. "So no one can touch it without me. No one should she corrected." There was a difference. I didn't ask the next question out loud, but I thought it. "What happens if they try?" She must have seen it on my face. "If something ever feels off," she said, "don't argue emotionally. Verify." That word stayed with me longer than anything else she said that day. Verify. I left her house thinking it was just one more example of how she liked to stay 10 steps ahead of everyone else. I didn't realize she was already accounting for something that hadn't happened yet. A week later, my mother brought it up like it was her idea. We were sitting at the dining table, same polished wood, same place settings she'd used for years, like consistency itself was proof of control. "I spoke to your grandmother," Elena said, folding her napkin neatly beside her plate. "About the fund." I looked up. "What about it?" "She thinks it would be easier if I helped manage it," she said. "Temporarily." Camilla, sitting across from me, barely looked up from her phone. I felt something tighten in my chest. "It's already structured," I said. "Legally." "Yes." My mom replied, her tone calm, almost patient, but that doesn't mean it's efficient. These things need oversight. Oversight by who, I asked. She smiled slightly. By someone who understands how families actually work. There it was, not about legality, about control. "I can manage my own finances," I said. "You manage your job," she corrected. "This is different." Camilla finally looked up. "Mom's just trying to help Nova." "It's not that deep." I turned to her. "It is when it's my name on it." My mom reached across the table, placing her hand lightly over mine. "I'm not taking anything from you," she said softly. "I'm protecting it. For your future." Her voice had that tone, warm, reassuring, impossible to challenge without sounding ungrateful. I pulled my hand back. "I'll think about it," I said. She nodded like that was already a yes. 3 days later, I got the email. Subject line: account structure update. Authorization confirmed. I stared at it longer than I should have. Then I opened it. It was from the financial institution holding the trust. The message was brief, formal, and precise. Per authorized, request account oversight has been transferred to Elena Gomez for administrative management. I read that sentence twice. Then a third time. Authorized request. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't approved anything, and I definitely hadn't missed a document that important. I called the number at the bottom of the email. "Hi," I said when someone picked up. "This is Nova Gomez. I just received a notice about a change in my trust account." "Let me pull that up for you," the woman said. I waited, staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I see the authorization here. Everything appears to be in order." "In order how?" I asked. "Who authorized it?" "According to our records, she said you did." Silence stretched between us. "That's not possible," I said quietly. There was a pause on her end. "Well," she added more carefully, "this time we do have a signed authorization form on file." My grip tightened around the phone. "Can you send me a copy of that document?" "Of course," she said. When the email came through, I didn't open it right away. I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong. And for the first time, I heard my grandmother's voice in my head clearer than ever. "If something feels off, verify." I clicked the file open. The signature at the bottom of the document looked like mine. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was how wrong it felt. I've signed my name thousands of times, contracts, reports, internal approvals. It's not something you think about until you see it copied. Almost perfectly. Almost. I zoomed in. The curve on the N was slightly sharper than mine. The spacing between Nova and Gomez was tighter. Small things. The kind of details most people wouldn't catch. But I did, because my job depends on catching things like that. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen, letting the realization settle in slowly instead of reacting to it. Someone had submitted a signed authorization form in my name, and the only person who benefited from that change was my mother. "Nova, you're overthinking this." Elena didn't even let me finish explaining. I had her on speaker, pacing my living room while the document sat open on my laptop. "I'm not overthinking anything," I said. "I didn't sign this." There was a pause just long enough to feel intentional. "Well," she said finally, "you agreed to let me help. That's not the same as signing a legal authorization." "You said you'd think about it," she replied. And I moved forward so things wouldn't get delayed. I stopped pacing. You moved forward. Without my consent. I moved forward for you, she corrected. There it was again, that subtle shift rewriting reality just enough to make resistance sound unreasonable. Mom, I said, forcing my voice to stay even, you don't get to make legal decisions on my behalf because you think it's better. You're making this into something it's not. Then explain the signature. Another pause. Longer this time. I assumed she said slowly that since you trusted me, formalities wouldn't be an issue. Formalities. That's what she called a forged signature. I closed my eyes for a second. This isn't a misunderstanding, I said. It's a problem. No, she replied, her tone sharpening just slightly. It's a solution you're refusing to accept. That night, Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table, reading the document on my laptop in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression had changed. Nova, he said carefully. This is serious. I know. No, he added, leaning forward. I mean, legally serious. If that signature isn't yours, it isn't. Then someone submitted a false authorization to a financial institution. I nodded. He exhaled slowly. Do you want to confront her? I shook my head. Not yet. That surprised him. Why not? Because right now, I said, closing the laptop halfway, she still thinks I don't know how bad this is. Daniel studied me for a moment. You're not going to let this go, are you? No, I said. I'm going to understand it first. There was a difference. Reacting would give her control over the narrative. Understanding would take it away. The next morning, I logged into the account again. This time, I didn't look at the signature. I looked at the transactions. Dates, amounts, transfers, patterns. The first withdrawal had been small, just under $10,000. Enough to test whether anyone would notice. The second was larger, then larger again. By the third transfer, the account had lost almost half its value. I pulled up the destination account details. The name wasn't Elena Gomez. It was a joint account. Elena Gomez and Camila Gomez. I stared at it longer than I expected to. Camila. I thought about the car, the photos she posted, the captions about finally upgrading and working hard pays off. I had assumed it was a loan or something temporary. I hadn't questioned it because I didn't want to. I called her anyway. Hey, Camila, answered her voice light like nothing in the world had shifted. Hey, I said. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did Mom help you with a big purchase recently? There was a pause. Not long, but not natural either. I mean, yeah, she said. She helped me out a little. Why? How much is a little? Why does it matter? Because it was my money. I didn't say that. Instead, I said, I'm just trying to understand where things stand. Nova? She said, her tone tightening slightly. If this is about the fund, Mom already explained everything. It's not like she took it for herself. I let that settle. Who did she take it for then? Another pause, then softer, almost defensive. For the family. That word again. Family. It sounded different coming from her. Less calculated. More believed. You think that means it's okay? I asked. I think she said you're acting like something terrible happened when it didn't. I looked back at the transaction list, at the numbers that used to represent my future. At what point I asked quietly, does it become terrible? She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, you've always had more than me, Nova. You'll be fine. That landed harder than anything else, not because it was true, but because she needed it to be. After I hung up, I didn't move for a while. I just sat there replaying everything. My mom's words, Camila's tone, my grandmother's warning. Don't argue emotionally. Verify. I opened a new folder on my desktop. Then I started saving everything. Bank statements, transaction histories, authorization documents, email confirmations, anything that connected one step to the next. If this was going to become something bigger, and I was starting to realize it already had, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. Real proof. The kind that doesn't rely on memory or interpretation. The kind that holds up when someone tries to deny it. By the end of the day, I had a timeline. Transfers, dates, account numbers. But there was still one thing missing. I didn't know how the authorization form had been submitted. In person, digitally, through a third party. That detail mattered, because it would tell me exactly how far this had gone, and who else might be involved. I opened my email again, scrolling back to the message from the bank. Then I noticed something I hadn't paid attention to before. A line at the bottom. Submission method in branch processing. I froze. In branch, which meant someone had walked into a physical bank location and handed over a document with my name on it. I didn't go home that night. I drove straight to the branch listed on the document. It was one of those older locations, brick exterior narrow parking lot, the kind of place that hadn't changed much in years. The lights were still on, but the doors were locked. Closing time had passed by 20 minutes. I sat in my car, engine running, staring at the glass doors like they might open if I waited long enough. In branch. That meant a person. A face. A moment in time that could be verified. Not a vague digital submission. Not something that could be brushed off as a system error. Someone had walked in and presented that document, and the bank had accepted it. The next morning I was there before they opened. When the doors unlocked, I stepped inside and went straight to the front desk. "Hi," I said, keeping my tone steady. "I need to speak with a manager about a transaction on my account." The woman at the desk gave me a polite smile. "Of course." One moment. A few minutes later, I was sitting across from a branch manager named Kevin Hartley. Mid-40s measured tone, the kind of person who had learned how to stay neutral in uncomfortable situations. "What can I help you with, Ms. Gomez?" he asked. I slid a printed copy of the authorization form across the desk. "This document was submitted here," I said, "and I need to understand how." He glanced down, scanning it quickly. "I see," he said. "What specifically concerns you? The signature isn't mine." He looked up at me, expression tightening just slightly. "That's a serious claim," he said. "I know." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together. "Do you have reason to believe the document was submitted fraudulently?" "Yes." "Then we'll need to review the submission records," he said. "That includes identification presented at the time, internal notes, and if available, security footage." That last part made something in my chest shift. "Footage," I repeated. "If the transaction was processed in person, he said there's a possibility it was captured on camera." A possibility? It wasn't certainty, but it was something. "I want to see it," I said. He nodded slowly. "I'll need to submit a request. It may take a few days." "I'll wait," I replied. 3 days felt longer than they should have. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat through meetings where people discussed projections and risk assessments, while my mind kept circling back to one question: who walked into that bank pretending to be me? I didn't tell my mother I was investigating. I didn't call Camilla again. Silence at that point wasn't avoidance. It was strategy. If they didn't know what I knew or what I was about to know, they couldn't adjust their story. When the call finally came, I stepped out of the office to take it. Ms. Gomez, Kevin said we've located footage from the day the authorization was submitted. You can come in to review it. My hand tightened around my phone. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The room they took me into wasn't large. Just a desk, a monitor, and a chair positioned directly in front of it. Kevin sat beside me pulling up the recording. The timestamp matches the submission record, he said. Late morning. The video loaded slowly, then it started. The camera angle was fixed wide enough to capture the teller counter and the waiting area behind it. People moved in and out of frame. A man in a suit. A woman with a child. Routine. Ordinary. Until it wasn't. Here, Kevin said, pausing the video, a figure stood at the counter. Female. Medium height. Dark hair pulled back. Even before he zoomed in, I felt it. That recognition you don't want to trust. Can you zoom? I asked. He did. The image sharpened just enough, and everything in me went still. It was my mother, Elena Gomez, standing at the counter handing over a document. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched. She was calm, confident, like she belonged there, like nothing about what she was doing was questionable. Do you recognize her? Kevin asked quietly. Yes, I said. That's my mother. He nodded, not reacting beyond that. Was she authorized to act on your behalf? No. We kept watching. The teller spoke. My mother responded. There was a moment where she reached into her bag and handed over an ID. Pause, I said. He paused it. Can you zoom in on that? He tried. The resolution wasn't perfect, but it was enough to see the shape of the card. It wasn't mine. The color was wrong. The layout didn't match. It was something else. Do you have any idea what identification she might have presented? Kevin asked. I shook my head slowly. No, I said. But whatever it wasn't legitimate. He exhaled. We'll need to escalate this. I barely heard him, because my attention had shifted to something else. The way my mother was speaking. The way she leaned slightly forward, lowering her voice. That wasn't how she talked to strangers. That was how she talked when she was convincing someone, when she was controlling the narrative. What happens now? I asked. Kevin turned back to me. We initiate a fraud investigation. That includes reviewing internal procedures, the teller's actions, and the documentation provided, and the funds. If the claim is validated, he said there's a process for recovery, but it can take time. Time. That was something my mother had already used to her advantage. I want copies of everything I said, the footage, the submission records, the internal notes. We can provide documentation as part of the investigation, he said carefully. I'm not waiting for this to move slowly, I replied. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. Understood. When I walked out of the bank, the air felt different. Not lighter, just clearer. There was no more uncertainty about what had happened. No more room for interpretation. My mother hadn't misunderstood anything. She hadn't made a mistake. She had walked into a bank, presented false authorization, and redirected my money, deliberately, and she had done it with enough confidence that no one stopped her. I got into my car and sat there for a minute. Then I picked up my phone. Not to call her. Not yet. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I had saved but never used. Rachel Stein, my attorney. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second. Then I pressed call. When she answered, I didn't waste time. I have proof, I said. There was a brief pause. What kind of proof, she asked. The kind that shows exactly who walked into that bank, I replied. Another pause, then more focused now. All right, she said. Tell me everything. I looked back at the bank one last time, at the doors my mother had walked through like she had every right. And for the first time since this started, I felt something settle into place. Not anger, not even betrayal. Something quieter, something sharper. Clarity. Because now this wasn't a family disagreement anymore. It was a case. Rachel didn't interrupt me once. I laid everything out, the authorization form, the transaction history, the footage from the bank, the ID that didn't match anything I owned. When I finished, there was a pause on the line. Then she said very calmly, "Okay, we're not guessing anymore." I exhaled, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means we move from suspicion to documentation," she said, "and we do it correctly." There was something grounding about the way she said that. No urgency, no dramatics, just structure. First, she continued, "I need copies of everything you have, every document, every email, the footage if they release it. Nothing gets filtered." "I already started organizing it," I said. "Timeline transactions, cross-references." "I'm not surprised," she replied. "That's going to help." She paused briefly, then added, "But I want to be very clear about something, Nova. Okay, this isn't just about your mother taking money. Based on what you've described, we're potentially looking at fraud, identity misrepresentation, and unauthorized financial control." The words landed heavier when she said them out loud. I had thought them, but hearing them framed like that made it real in a different way. "What happens if we prove it?" I asked. "There are a few paths," she said. "Civil recovery of the funds is one. That's the immediate priority. But depending on how this unfolds, there could also be criminal implications." I closed my eyes for a second. Criminal. That wasn't a word I had ever imagined attaching to my family. "I'm not trying to get her arrested," I said quietly. "I understand," Rachel replied. "And you don't control that part entirely, but what you do control is how you proceed." That was the part I needed to hold on to. Control. "Then we proceed carefully," I said. "Exactly." 2 days later, I was sitting across from Rachel in her office. Everything was spread out between us. Printed statements, highlighted transaction logs, copies of emails, and the authorization form, the one with my name on it. Rachel tapped the bottom of the page. "This is where it breaks," she said. The signature, the submission method, and the supporting identification, she clarified. Any one of those could be explained away individually. Together they form a pattern. I nodded. "Pattern of intent," I said. "Exactly." She leaned back slightly. "Now here's the part you need to think about carefully," she continued. "Do you want to confront your mother before we initiate anything formal?" I didn't answer right away, because that question wasn't simple. If I confronted her now, she would know. She would have time to adjust, to deny, to reshape the story before it was documented properly. If I didn't, I would be carrying this alone a little longer. "What would you recommend?" I asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. "I recommend you don't." I let out a quiet breath. Why? Because right now she said she believes this is contained. She believes you're reacting emotionally, not strategically. That gives you an advantage. I looked down at the papers again, at the clean, organized version of something that had felt chaotic just days ago. "And if I wait?" I asked. "Then we control the narrative when it matters," she said. That night I didn't call my mother. I didn't text Camilla. I went to a family dinner instead. Because if I was going to understand how far this went, I needed to see how they behaved when they thought nothing had changed. The house looked the same. The smell of food, the sound of voices, the familiar rhythm of something that was supposed to feel like home. Nova Elena said when I walked in, smiling like there was nothing between us. "You made it." "Yeah," I said. Of course, Camilla was already at the table scrolling through her phone. She looked up briefly. Hey. Normal. Everything felt normal. That was the unsettling part. Dinner started the way it always did. Small talk, updates, things that didn't matter. Until they did. So my mom said casually, "Have you finalized any wedding plans yet?" I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because of the timing. "I'm still figuring things out," I said. "You shouldn't wait too long," she added. "Venues book quickly." I know. Camilla leaned back in her chair. "Honestly, you don't even need to spend that much. Keep it simple." Simple. I thought about the account balance, about what was left of it. Maybe I said. Elena smiled, satisfied with the answer. She thought she had already solved the problem. Later that evening, I found her alone in the kitchen. She was rinsing dishes, her movements calm-controlled. "Mom," I said. She turned, drying her hands. "Yeah, I went to the bank." There was a flicker, small, but it was there. "What for?" she asked. I wanted to understand the account changes. Her expression didn't shift much. "Like I told you," she said, "everything was handled." I saw the footage. That did it. Not a dramatic reaction, just a pause. Long enough to confirm everything I needed. "What footage?" she asked. The day the authorization was submitted, I said. She held my gaze. Didn't look away. Didn't deny it immediately. Just watched me, and in that moment I understood something I hadn't fully seen before. She wasn't scrambling. She was calculating. "How much do you think you understand?" she asked quietly. It wasn't defensive. It was measured, like she was deciding how much to reveal. "Enough," I said. She nodded once, then said something I hadn't expected. I did what I had to do. No apology, no justification, just a statement. For who I asked. For this family. I let that sit between us. "Did you think I wouldn't find out?" I asked. "I thought she said you would eventually understand." That word again. Understand. As if what she had done just needed time to make sense. Understand what I asked. That you don't build stability by keeping resources separate, she said. You build it by redistributing where it's needed. I stared at her. This wasn't yours to redistribute. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she said, "You're doing fine, Nova. You always have been." And there it was. The logic underneath everything. I didn't need it, so it could be taken. I didn't argue. Not because I agreed, because I didn't need to anymore. "I'll talk to you later," I said. She watched me for a second, then nodded. "Okay." When I left that night, I didn't feel angry. I felt certain about what she had done, about why she had done it, and about what I needed to do next. Because this wasn't going to resolve itself through conversation. It wasn't going to shift because I explained it better. It was already set. The only thing left was to decide how it would end. The next morning, I walked back into Rachel's office. "I spoke to her," I said. Rachel looked up. "And..." She didn't deny it. Rachel nodded slowly. "Then we're ready," she said. For what? She closed the file in front of her. To put this on record. I felt something tighten in my chest. Not hesitation, just the weight of it. Because once this moved forward, it wouldn't stay private anymore. Putting it on record sounded simple when Rachel said it. It wasn't. It meant every document I had carefully organized would now be reviewed by people who didn't know, my family didn't care about our history, and wouldn't soften anything to protect it. It meant the story my mother had been controlling would be examined line by line. And it meant I had to be ready for what that would expose. We started with a formal notice. Rachel drafted it while I sat across from her reading each paragraph as it took shape. This isn't an accusation, she said, sliding the draft toward me. It's a demand for clarification and restitution based on documented discrepancies. I scanned the page. Clear language. No emotion. Identification of the trust account. Summary of unauthorized transfers. Reference to the in-branch submission. Request for explanation within a defined time frame. Notice of potential legal escalation if unresolved. It didn't mention betrayal. It didn't mention family. It didn't need to. Once this is delivered, Rachel added, you stop engaging informally. No more conversations that aren't documented. I nodded. Understood. The letter went out that afternoon. Certified delivery. Signature required. There was something almost surreal about watching it leave my hands. Like I was sending a version of the truth out into the world and waiting to see how it came back. 2 days later, my phone rang. Elena. I let it go to voicemail. Then she called again. And again. By the 4th call, I picked up. What is this? She asked. No greeting, no hesitation. Her voice wasn't angry. It was controlled. But there was something underneath it, pressure. You received the notice, I said. Don't do that, she replied sharply. Don't pretend this is some kind of formal situation. It is a formal situation. This is family. No, I said quietly. This is documentation. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing measured but heavier than usual. You're escalating something that didn't need to be escalated, she said. It needed to be acknowledged, I replied. I already explained what happened. You explained your version. And you think strangers are going to understand this better than I do, she asked. Yes. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Silence filled the space between us. Then lower now, more deliberate. You're choosing them over your own family. I leaned back in my chair. I'm choosing facts over interpretation. That night, Camilla showed up at my apartment, unannounced. I opened the door and found her standing there, arms folded, expression tight. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside. She walked in looking around like she hadn't been there before, even though she had. This is a lot, she said, turning back to me. Mom showed me the letter. I figured she would. Camilla shook her head. Nova, this doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? I didn't answer right away because I wanted to understand what she was actually asking. Doing what I said. Making it legal, she replied. Bringing in lawyers. Sending notices. It was already legal, I said. I'm just addressing it. That's not how it feels, she said. How does it feel? Like you're trying to prove something instead of fixing it. I held her gaze. What would fixing it look like to you? She hesitated. Talking? She said. Working it out. Not this. I nodded slowly. And if talking doesn't change anything? She didn't answer. Instead, she said, You're making Mom look like a criminal. I'm documenting what happened. That's not the same thing. No, I said. It's not. She walked over to the window, arms still crossed. You know, she didn't do this for herself, Camilla said after a moment. I know she didn't take the money and disappear, I replied. That doesn't make it okay. She was trying to help, with money that wasn't hers. Camilla turned back to me. You've always had more options than me, she said. You had your career, your savings, everything lined up. I didn't. There it was again. Not anger, not entitlement, just a belief. A quiet, persistent belief that the difference between us justified the decision. And that means my money becomes available, I asked. That's not what I'm saying. It's exactly what you're saying. She looked down, then back up again. I didn't know how it was transferred, she admitted. I thought Mom had arranged it properly. That was new. Not a denial, not a defense. Just uncertainty. What did she tell you? I asked. That you agreed, Camilla said. That you didn't need it right away. That it made more sense to use it where it would actually make a difference. I let that settle. Because that was the story my mother had built. Not just for me. For everyone. And you believed her, I said. Camilla didn't respond immediately. Then quietly I wanted to. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then she said something that shifted everything just slightly. If it turns out she wasn't honest about how this was done, she started, then stopped. What I asked. She took a breath. I don't know what I'll do, she said, but I won't pretend it's fine. That wasn't an apology, but it wasn't alignment with my mother either. It was space. And for the first time since this started, I saw the possibility that Camilla wasn't part of the plan, just part of the outcome. After she left, I sat alone in my apartment replaying the conversation. My mother had controlled the narrative. Camilla had accepted it, and I had been expected to absorb it. That was the structure. That was how it worked. Until now. The response to the notice came the next morning, not from my mother, from her attorney. Rachel forwarded it to me with a single message. We need to talk. I opened the document. It was brief, professional, and very clear. Denial of any intentional wrongdoing. Assertion that actions were taken in good faith for family benefit. Request to resolve the matter privately without further escalation. I read it twice, then a third time. They weren't denying the transfers. They weren't denying the authorization. They were reframing it. Good faith. Family benefit. As if intention could replace consent. When I got to Rachel's office, she already had the response printed out. They're positioning this as a misunderstanding, she said. It's not. I know, she replied, but that's their entry point. She tapped the page. This is where it shifts. How I asked. Because now she said we decide whether to accept a private resolution or proceed with formal claims. I looked at the document again, at the careful language, at the way it tried to soften something that wasn't soft. What would a private resolution look like, I asked. Full repayment, she said. Documented acknowledgement. Possibly additional terms. And if we don't accept that Rachel met my eyes, then we move forward publicly. I felt the weight of that settle in. Public. Not just legal. Visible. And once that line was crossed, there was no pulling it back. I looked down at my hands, then back at her. They think I'll choose quiet, I said. Rachel didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because the decision wasn't theoretical anymore. It was right there, waiting. And for the first time, I realized something I hadn't fully understood before. This wasn't just about getting the money back. It was about whether the truth stayed contained or became something they couldn't control. The word private sat wrong with me, not because I needed an audience, but because I understood what it really meant in my family. Private meant controlled. It meant the story would stay in my mother's version, softened, adjusted, explained, until it barely resembled what had actually happened. I looked at Rachel across the desk. "What exactly are they offering?" I asked. She slid another page toward me. "It's not a full offer yet," she said, "more like a signal." I read it carefully. Willingness to return a portion of the funds. No admission of wrongdoing. Mutual agreement to keep the matter confidential. No further legal action. A portion? I almost laughed. "They're negotiating with money that isn't theirs," I said. Rachel didn't react. "They're testing your threshold." "My threshold is full repayment." I assumed, she said. I tapped the page. "And acknowledgement." "That's the part they're avoiding," she replied. "Because acknowledgement creates liability." Of course it did. Without acknowledgement, this could stay a misunderstanding. With it, it became something else entirely. "I want to see the exact numbers again," I said. Rachel pulled up the account summary, line by line, transfer by transfer. Each one dated, documented, linked. I followed the pattern again, slower this time. The initial withdrawal, the escalation, the final transfer that emptied almost everything. Then something caught my attention. "Wait," I said, leaning forward. "This one." Rachel glanced at the line I was pointing to. "The second transfer?" she asked. "No," I said. "The timing. It was processed late in the afternoon, later than the others, almost at closing." "Is that unusual?" she asked. "Not by itself," I said. "But look at the processing note." She zoomed in. "Manual override." I felt something shift. "Why would they need a manual override?" I asked. Rachel's expression changed slightly. "Usually," she said, "that indicates the system flagged something." "For what?" "Could be anything," she replied. "Amount threshold, identity verification issue, documentation inconsistency." I sat back. "That means someone had to approve it anyway." "Yes, which means there's another person who saw something wasn't right and processed it anyway." Rachel nodded slowly. "That's significant," she said. It was more than significant. It meant this wasn't just my mother walking in with a document. It meant the bank had hesitated and then moved forward anyway. "Can we get the internal notes for that transaction?" I asked. "We can request them," Rachel said. "It may take time." "I don't want assumptions," I said. "I want to know exactly what was flagged." She made a note. "All right." That afternoon, I drove past my grandmother's house. I hadn't gone back since the funeral. The curtains were drawn. The front yard looked exactly the same, but it felt different, quieter, like something that used to anchor everything was no longer there. I sat in the car for a while, remembering the last conversation we had in that kitchen. Don't argue emotionally. Verify. She hadn't just been warning me about my mother. She had been preparing me for this exact moment, for the point where things stopped being about feelings and became about facts. The call from Mr. Pierce came later that evening. "Nova," he said, his voice measured as always. "I understand you've begun formal proceedings regarding the trust. I said, I thought it might be time to revisit something," he continued. "What is it, the letter your grandmother left?" I went still. I remember I said, "There's a section we didn't fully discuss during the initial reading," he added, "because it didn't seem immediately relevant at the time. And now it does." Yes, that was enough to get my attention. "What does it say?" I asked. "I'd prefer to go through it with you in person," he replied. "It involves instructions tied to potential misuse of the fund." Potential misuse. She had planned for this, not just emotionally, legally. "When can we meet?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll be there." That night I didn't sleep much, not because I was anxious, because something was aligning. The footage, the forged signature, the manual override, the legal response. And now, a letter my grandmother had written anticipating misuse. This wasn't random. It wasn't reactive. It was structured. And I was only now seeing the full shape of it. The next morning, I walked into Mr. Pierce's office with Rachel beside me. He greeted us, then reached into a folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This is the section I mentioned," he said, placing it on the desk. I didn't touch it right away. Why wasn't this read before I asked? Because he said it was categorized as conditional instruction. It only becomes active under specific circumstances. Rachel leaned slightly forward. "And those circumstances are," Mr. Pierce looked at me, "unauthorized use of the designated trust funds." The room went quiet. I picked up the letter. The handwriting was unmistakable. My grandmother's. Careful. Deliberate. I started reading, and within the first few lines I realized something that made everything else shift. This wasn't just a warning. It was a plan. If the funds allocated to Nova Gomez are accessed, redirected, or managed without her explicit documented consent, I felt my grip tighten on the paper. The responsible party forfeits any discretionary claim to remaining family-controlled assets under my estate. I stopped reading, looked up. "What does that mean?" I asked. Mr. Pierce didn't hesitate. "It means," he said, "if your mother is found to have misused those funds, she may lose access to other assets your grandmother left under her control." Rachel's eyes shifted to mine. "That changes the leverage," she said quietly. Leverage. That was one way to put it. Because this wasn't just about repayment anymore. This was about everything my mother thought she still had control over. I looked back down at the letter, at the lines written in a hand I trusted more than anyone else's. And for the first time since this started, I felt something different. Not just clarity, not just control. Power. Not loud, not aggressive, but real, because my grandmother hadn't just left me money. She had left me a structure, one that didn't rely on emotion, one that didn't depend on whether anyone admitted the truth, one that enforced it. I folded the letter carefully, then looked at Rachel. "What happens if we use this?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to, because we both understood. If we invoked that clause, this wouldn't stay contained. It wouldn't stay quiet. It would force everything into the open, and it would cost my mother more than she expected. A lot more. Rachel didn't reach for the letter. She let me hold it. That was deliberate, because whatever came next wasn't just legal, it was mine to decide. "If we invoke this clause," she said carefully, "we're not just asking for repayment. We're triggering a consequence tied to your grandmother's entire estate structure." I nodded. "I understand." "Do you?" she asked, not challenging, just making sure. I looked back down at the paper, at the way my grandmother had written it so plainly. No emotion, no room for interpretation, just cause and effect. "I think she expected this exact situation," I said. Mr. Pierce gave a small nod. She was very intentional. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Then you need to be just as intentional. We didn't decide immediately. We outlined options. That was how Rachel worked. Nothing moved forward without structure. Option 1, accept private resolution, full repayment, no clause invoked. Matter stays contained. Option 2, demand repayment plus acknowledgement, still contained but with documented fault. Option 3, invoke the clause, escalate fully, allow estate consequences to take effect. Each option had a cost, not just legally, personally. Which one aligns with your goal? Rachel asked. That question mattered more than the options themselves. Because my goal wasn't revenge, it wasn't even punishment. It was clarity and boundaries that couldn't be rewritten later. I want the truth documented, I said. Rachel nodded once. Then option 2 or 3, and if they refuse to acknowledge it, then you're already in option 3, she said. We left Mr. Pierce's office without committing to a final step, but something had already shifted. Before that meeting, I had been responding. Now, I was choosing. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't my mother. It was Camilla. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hey, she said quieter than usual. Hey. There was a pause on her end. I need to ask you something, she said. Okay. Are you trying to take everything away from Mom? I closed my eyes for a second, because that was the narrative now, not what happened, what it meant. I'm trying to correct what was taken from me, I said. That's not how she sees it. I know. Another pause. She told me about the clause Camilla said. That got my attention. How I asked. She talked to Mr. Pierce, Camilla replied. After your meeting? Of course she had. She's scared, Camilla added. I leaned back in my chair. She should be concerned, I said. That's not the same thing, Camilla said quickly. Nova, if you push this, she could lose more than just money. I didn't write that clause, but you can choose to use it. Yes. Silence settled between us again. Then softer now I didn't know, Camilla said. About how the money was transferred. About the signature. I believed her. Not because I wanted to, because it matched everything I had seen. I know I said. But now I do, she continued. And I don't know where that leaves me. I didn't answer right away, because I wasn't going to decide that for her. That depends on what you do next, I said finally. That evening I got an email from Rachel. Subject revised position draft. I opened it. It was short, precise, and very different from the first notice we sent. Demand for full repayment of misused funds. Requirement of written acknowledgement of unauthorized actions. Reference to supporting evidence already obtained. Notice that failure to comply will result in invocation of conditional estate clause. No threats, no emotion, just sequence. I read it twice, then a third time. This wasn't escalation for the sake of pressure. It was structure. Exactly the way my grandmother had intended. Do you want to send it? Rachel asked when I called her. I didn't answer immediately, because I understood what this would do. It would force my mother into a position where she had to choose. Admit what happened, or risk losing more than she expected. There's no version of this where she admits it easily, I said. No, Rachel agreed. There isn't. And if she doesn't, then the clause becomes active, she said. I looked at the email again, at the clarity of it, at how little room it left for interpretation. She'll say I'm destroying the family I said. Rachel didn't respond to that, because whether she said it or not, it was already implied. I hit send. The response didn't come right away, but the silence felt different this time. Heavier, more deliberate, like something was being calculated on the other side. 3 days later, we were back in Mr. Pierce's office. Not just me and Rachel. Elena was there, and Camilla. For the first time since this started, we were all in the same room with the truth sitting between us. My mother didn't look at me when I walked in. She was focused on Mr. Pierce, on the structure, on the rules. That was new. Camilla did look at me, briefly, then away. Mr. Pierce cleared his throat. "We're here to discuss the response to Ms. Gomez's formal position," he said. Elena finally turned. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't defensive. It was controlled, but tighter than before. "We received the demand," she said, and Rachel asked calmly. Elena's gaze shifted slightly. "To comply with full repayment," she said, "is something we are prepared to discuss." Prepared to discuss? Not agree, along with acknowledgement, Rachel added. That's where it changed. My mother's jaw tightened just slightly. "That language is unnecessary," she said. "It's essential," Rachel replied. "It reframes intent," Elena said. "And that matters." "No," Rachel said evenly. "It clarifies action. That matters more." Silence settled again. This time it wasn't just tension, it was pressure. Because both sides understood what was at stake now. Mr. Pierce spoke next. If acknowledgement is not included, he said, Ms. Gomez has indicated she is prepared to invoke the conditional clause. That was the moment everything shifted. My mother looked at me directly, for the first time since I walked in. "You would do that?" she asked. Not accusing, not emotional, just asking. I held her gaze. "You already made the decision that led here," I said. She didn't look away, but something in her expression changed. Not fear. Not yet. Recognition. Because for the first time, she realized I wasn't going to adjust to her version of this. She was going to have to respond to mine. No one spoke for a few seconds. Then Mr. Pierce said quietly, "We should take a brief recess." But no one moved, because we all knew this wasn't a break in the conversation. It was the point where it either resolved or escalated, and neither option was comfortable anymore. No one actually left the room. Mr. Pierce's suggestion of a recess hung there, but it didn't change anything. The tension had already reached the point where stepping away wouldn't soften it. It would just delay what was coming. My mother was still looking at me, not with anger, not even with disappointment, with calculation. "You're asking me to put something in writing," she said slowly, "that could be interpreted far beyond what actually happened." Rachel didn't let that sit unanswered. "No," she said. "We're asking you to document what did happen." Elena's gaze shifted to her. "From your perspective." From the evidence Rachel corrected, there was a difference. And for the first time, my mother didn't try to blur it immediately. Instead, she leaned back slightly in her chair, exhaling through her nose like she was recalibrating. Camilla sat beside her, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since we walked in. I could feel her watching both of us, waiting to see which version of reality would hold. "Let's be clear about the options," Mr. Pierce said, his voice steady, deliberate. He looked at my mother first. "You can agree to full repayment and a written acknowledgement of unauthorized use of the trust funds." Then he looked at me. Or if that acknowledgement is refused, Ms. Gomez may proceed with invoking the conditional clause, which could affect your standing in the remaining estate distribution." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The weight was in the words themselves. My mother's fingers tightened slightly against the armrest of her chair. "Unauthorized," she repeated quietly. "That word carries intent. It reflects action," Rachel said. "It suggests wrongdoing. It reflects documented behavior." The back and forth was precise. No emotion, just definitions. Because that was where this battle was happening now. Not in what we felt, in how it would be recorded. Elena Camila said suddenly, her voice breaking the pattern. It wasn't loud, but it shifted the room. My mother turned to her. Camilla hesitated for a second, then continued. "Did you tell the bank that Nova had signed that form?" Silence. Real silence this time. Not strategic. Not controlled. Just still. My mother didn't answer immediately, and that hesitation said more than anything else could have. "Answer her," I said quietly. Elena looked back at me, then at Camilla, then down at her hands. I presented the document. She said finally, "That's not what I asked." Camilla replied. Her voice was steadier now. "Did you tell them Nova had signed it?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then, "Yes." The word landed flat. No explanation. No justification. Just confirmation. Camilla leaned back slightly, like something had physically shifted inside her. "You told me." "She agreed," she said. "I believed she would," Elena replied. "That's not the same thing. I made a decision based on what was best for the family." Camilla shook her head slowly. "That's not what this is," she said. It was the first time she said it out loud. "Not to me. To our mother." Rachel didn't interrupt. Neither did Mr. Pierce. Because that moment mattered more than anything they could add. "Then say it," I said. My voice was calm, steady. "Say what Elena asked. Say that you used my name to move money I didn't authorize." Her eyes met mine again, and this time there was no calculation left. Just resistance. "I won't phrase it that way," she said. "Then how will you phrase it?" Rachel asked. Elena turned slightly toward her. "I will acknowledge that the funds were transferred under my direction," she said carefully, "and that there was a misunderstanding regarding authorization." Rachel didn't respond immediately. She looked at me, because now it wasn't about legal wording. It was about whether I would accept it. I thought about it, about everything that had led to this room, the document, the footage, the conversations, the patterns, a misunderstanding. That was the version she could live with, the version that didn't require her to see herself differently. And for a second, I understood why. Not agreed with it. Understood it. Because admitting what she had done in full would change how she saw herself. And that was something she wasn't ready to do. But I wasn't responsible for that. "I won't accept that language," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Rachel nodded once, then turned back to Mr. Pierce. "Then we proceed accordingly." Elena's head snapped slightly toward me. "You're really going to do this?" she said. Not a question. A realization. "I already did," I replied. Mr. Pierce adjusted the papers in front of him. "Then we need to formally acknowledge the invocation of the clause," he said. The room shifted again, because this wasn't negotiation anymore. It was execution. Elena, he continued under the terms outlined by Ms. Alvarez. Misuse of the designated trust triggers a forfeiture condition tied to discretionary estate assets. My mother didn't interrupt him this time. She just listened, her posture still straight. But something in her expression had changed. Not fear, but awareness of consequence. This will require a full review of estate allocations, he added, and may result in redistribution. May Rachel asked. Mr. Pierce met her gaze. In this case, he said likely will. Camilla turned to my mother again. What does that mean? She asked. Elena didn't answer right away, because she understood it before it was explained. It means Mr. Pierce said that certain assets previously under your mother's control may no longer be accessible to her. Camilla's eyes widened slightly. And where do they go? Mr. Pierce glanced at me briefly. According to the structure outlined, they would be reassigned within the estate. He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. The room went quiet again. But it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one had weight, finality, because something had just shifted that couldn't be undone. My mother looked at me one last time, not with anger, not even with disappointment. Just distance. You've made your point, she said. I shook my head slightly. This was never about making a point. Then what was it about? She asked. I held her gaze. Not letting you decide what's mine. She didn't respond to that, because there wasn't anything left to say that would change what had already been set in motion. When the meeting ended, no one rushed out. There was no dramatic exit, no raised voices, just movement, papers being gathered, chairs shifting, a process continuing. Camilla stopped beside me before leaving. I didn't think it would go this far, she said quietly. I didn't either, I replied. She nodded slowly, then added, but I understand why it did. That was the closest thing to alignment we had reached. I watched them leave. My mother first, then Camilla. And for the first time since this started, I didn't feel like I was reacting to something. I felt like I had finished something. Not emotionally, not completely, but structurally. The part that required proof, clarity, boundaries that couldn't be rewritten. That part was done. Rachel stepped beside me. You okay? She asked. I nodded. Yeah. She studied me for a moment, then said, most people don't follow through when it gets to this point. I'm not most people, I said. No, she agreed. You're not. As we walked out of the building, my phone buzzed. A notification. Not a call, not a message, an email from the bank. Subject line: fraud investigation. Preliminary outcome. I stopped walking, opened it. And as I read the first line, I realized something else had just shifted. Something outside of our control. Something that would make everything we just did matter even more. I stood on the sidewalk, the city noise moving around me, and read the email twice before it fully registered. Preliminary findings confirm unauthorized authorization submission. Further review indicates internal protocol deviation during processing. I exhaled slowly. Not relief. Not yet. Just confirmation. Rachel stepped closer. What is it? I turned the screen toward her. She read it once, then again, more carefully. This does two things, she said. It validates your claim, and it shifts part of the responsibility back onto the bank. Because of the override, I said. She nodded. Exactly. For a second, everything felt strangely quiet. All the pieces that had been scattered documents, conversations, patterns, they weren't just aligned now. They were recognized. Not just by me, by systems that didn't care about family intention or narrative, just process. The next few weeks moved faster than I expected. Once the clause was invoked and the bank confirmed irregularities, things stopped being negotiable. They became procedural. The trust funds were restored first. Every dollar, documented, tracked. Returned to an account under my sole control. No shared access, no temporary oversight, no interpretation, just structure. The estate review took longer, but not by much. My grandmother's clause had been written clearly enough that once it was triggered, there wasn't much room for debate. Assets that had previously been under my mother's discretion were reassessed, reallocated, not taken out of emotion, reassigned by design, exactly the way she had planned. I didn't attend every meeting. I didn't need to. Rachel handled most of it. That was part of the boundary, too. I didn't have to be present for every consequence to be real. The only time I saw my mother again during that process was at the final signing. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No confrontation. Just a room. A table. Documents waiting to be executed. She looked smaller. Not physically. Structurally. Like something she had relied on without realizing it was no longer there. Control. She didn't try to argue. She didn't try to reframe anything. She signed where she was told to sign. And that was it. Camilla spoke to me outside afterward. "I'm not asking you to undo anything," she said. I nodded. "I know." She hesitated. "I've been thinking about what you said," she added. "About not letting someone decide what's yours." I waited. I didn't see it that way before she admitted. I thought, if it helped, it made sense. "That's how it's framed," I said. "Yeah," she replied, "but it doesn't hold up when you look at it closely." No, it didn't. We didn't fix everything in that conversation. We didn't try to. But there was something different now. Not agreement. Understanding. And that was enough for where we were. I didn't use the money for a wedding. That surprised people. It surprised Daniel, too. "You've been planning this for years," he said one night. "I've been planning stability," I corrected, "and that still includes us." I smiled slightly. "It includes what we choose, not what we're pressured into." He nodded. That was enough. I invested most of it. Diversified. Structured. Something that would grow, instead of disappear. Something that couldn't be redirected without my consent. That part mattered more than I expected, because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control that couldn't be quietly taken. I didn't cut my family off completely, but I changed access. That was the boundary. No shared accounts. No financial discussions that weren't documented. No decisions made on my behalf. Contact stayed. Control didn't. My mother reached out a few times after everything settled. Short messages, neutral tone. No acknowledgement of what happened. I didn't respond the way I used to. I didn't fill in the gaps. I didn't soften anything. I just didn't engage where it didn't serve me. That was new, and it felt different than anger, cleaner. The last time I saw her, she said something that stayed with me. "You think this made you stronger?" I looked at her. It didn't make me anything I said. It showed me what was already there. She didn't respond, and for once, she didn't try to reframe it. That was enough. If you've made it this far, I'm curious, where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Because stories like this don't usually start with something obvious. They start small, with something that feels slightly off, something you're told not to question. And most people don't, not because they can't, because it's easier not to. But here's what I learned. You don't need to raise your voice to set a boundary. You don't need to prove someone is wrong to protect what's yours. And you don't need permission to verify something that affects your life. For anyone who's ever been told they're overreacting when something doesn't feel right, you're allowed to check. You're allowed to ask for proof. And you're allowed to walk away from any version of family that only works when you give up control. If that resonates with you, you can stay. There are more stories like this. This story is fictional and created for entertainment, education, and reflection.